Hello and adab. Welcome back to another episode of Koshish A Balance. I'm Dr. Mantasha Binti Rashid, and as you know, in Koshish A Balance, we attempt to bring to you women who can inspire you, women who have stories to share, women whose achievements you would want to know, women who have lessons for you. We have with us today one such wonderful and amazing professional, Dr. Shabnam Bashir. Hi, Doctor.
Hello, thank you for having me here.
And thank you for coming. Dr. Shabnam Bashir, let me tell you, is an oncosurgeon and she specializes in breast cancer surgeries and colorectal surgeries. She is one of the first Kashmiri female oncosurgeons who specializes with advanced surgeries and has done her robotics surgeries also from US, and she qualified medical entrance here in Jammu and Kashmir and went on to become a doctor from Government Medical College Srinagar. Thereafter she's also practiced in different states in India like Bangalore, Delhi, Maharashtra, and then she came back to serve her people in Kashmir, and she's here with us. Dr. Shabnam, we would want to know from you your journey, your education, how you became a doctor. Was it always an aim to become a doctor, or did it change every year, like it is for young children? You know, sometimes you want to become something, and some other times something else. Was it the pressure from home because your dad has also been a doctor? Tell our audience a little bit more about it.
Well, on the contrary, my dad never wanted me to be a doctor.
Interesting.
Probably because of the miseries he had gone through, and he knew, how long it takes you to settle down and what kind of stuff you have to face when you're into the medical profession. Call it, chance. My getting into the medical profession was the chance, but then what followed was a choice. So when he wanted me to be into administrative services, and I was practicing for the same. In 12th also, I had not taken up tuitions for this. I was an entirely different track, and I don't know whether to call it fortunately or unfortunately. One of my friends actually in 12th was a palmist, and she said, she was seeing all the palms around you. You are in 12th, and you're like, okay, let me also try.
Certainly.
And being a true Aryan, she said that you're never going to be in a professional college. And I said, Isi saal, this year I'm going to have it.
So you took it as a challenge.
As a challenge. And unfortunately or fortunately, I cracked it in the first go. And then the story started, or the saga started.
Right.
And once you get the seat, you obviously you have to have a huge heart to leave it.
Oh, yes.
So I thought I would probably, get into the medicine, clear my MBBS, and then again track myself towards the administrative services. And my dad was like, now that you're in, don't go for the clinics, go for non-clinical, you'll have a much peaceful life. So go for WHO job or any other non-clinical job, and then you don't have that headache of clinics. I said, let me see. And then a year's time, I decided that, non-clinics is not where I belong. And then I said, I think I'm, for clinics. And then he said, okay. So that was the first jolt was my selection. Second jolt was my decision of getting into clinics. And third was, when I told him that, in fourth year or so, when I got exposed to surgical brands, I said, I think I'm loving surgery. And he was like, oh my God, this girl is, set to do in her life, her peace of mind. So please go for gynecology. Maybe, it'll be a quick end to this. And but then obviously, they also have such a hectic life, majority of the deliveries through the night and all. But somehow in that code, when I used to attend my surgical trainings, that's where my heart belonged. So even in my training period, when I was not supposed to do nights as an extern, as a final year, I would take up nights additional, and my seniors would be, "Are you crazy? I mean, people leave their they exchange their nights, and you're taking additional. You're not supposed to be here." I said, "My heart belongs to this place," and I used to sit in the wards, bedside of the patients. We used to have those drainage issues, this issue, that issue, and that is where I decided that surgery is the thing for me. And that's how the whole journey started. And for my surgical training, actually, I wanted to go to UK to get all the best possible surgical trainings and come back.
Right.
Life always takes you where you probably, you have to serve your
Belong.
purpose. So I cleared my PLAB, my IELTS, my MRCS. all went to the Delhi, joined Apollo hospitals, did my accidents and emergencies, and in 6 months time I almost cleared all the toughest exams there to go. And by the October of 2005 I was set to go there and start my General Medical Council training, registration and training. And that's when they started expelling the non-European doctors
Right.
out that very month.
Uh-huh.
And I was told that this place is gone now. You can't come and get trained, and that felt like a devastation at that point
At
of
that
time,
point.
because I had done all my training and my exams and preparations to clear those exams and reach there
Right.
and then get the training. So there was a setback, had to stay back. State registration, state PG exam time had already gone, didn't want to waste more time. And those days, the national board had started a national examination for surgeries, appeared in that, cleared, and the whole track. But whenever I look back in these around 3 decades of my life, and I entered my medical college, it has never been a straight track.
Right.
But it's only when you put those pieces of jigsaw together, you understand why it happened when it happened. What were you actually supposed to be doing? Where were you actually destined to be? What was your that ikigai, that purpose of
Purpose
life?
of life.
And
yeah.
everything was taking you there, but with obviously a lot of toiling that you go through at those momentary setbacks. So that's how the journey towards surgery started. But getting into the surgery was also not very easy, because when I cleared my national board examinations, the DNB, we had to go and physically appear for the interviews everywhere, like we have counselings these days. And the first hospital that I appeared in, they had 3 seats for surgery, and we were some 20-25 candidates who had to appear in the interview. I scored well, because even at that point of time I had cleared my outside exams, and I had publications, and I had a very strong CV. So I was indirectly told that you're selected and all. But when the results were out, I could see 2 other guys selected, and I wasn't there. And they said, the 3rd seat is not there, so we'll be just taking 2 people. Reasons were different, but yeah, that was a big jolt for me, because probably people somewhere down the line were not comfortable having female surgeons or female
surgeons.
residents. They
It's still a taboo.
Oh yes, it is. But now things are changing. After a pretty long time, they're changing. So when the second place I had to apply for, I was told far before my interview that this place is not for girls, right on my face. And we're not going to take a female surgical resident. In our history, we have not had ever a surgical resident. So I said, fine, then, if I'm having such a strong CV, if I am doing good in my interviews, and if you don't give me my due credit, I will
Right.
take you to the court of law. Then let's fight it there.
Which place was this?
One of the places, yeah. One of the places in
in
Delhi
in
NCR.
Delhi,
In
okay.
Delhi NCR.
Right.
But it so happened eventually that, the day arrived, I had to appear in interview, and Shukrallah, I did it so well that there was a kind of conflict within the unit. One unit versus another unit, one saying, no, we need her in, and the other saying, no, not at any cost. But I got selected. And then for next 6 months, my life was made real miserable. From being said that, now that you enter the hospital and you're a resident, you're supposed to reside in the hospital, which means you're coming every 7:30 every day and leaving after 9:30 from this very place, right from day one, which didn't give me any chance to get, my room
Set up.
furnished, set up, get the curtains, get the basic beddings that you
Right.
want at least to have 2 hours of sleep in the night, to get the inverter connections. So right from moving from -10 to a temperature of say 50, 51,
Yes.
and then not even having your fan working at times,
Oh God.
was a very horrifying phase. And then every 36 hours you come back home, you don't have even energy to open your tiffin. The tiffin wala has kept it there, but you don't have energy. You have to wash your clothes also. You have to offer your prayers and all. And then you don't have the bedding, because you never get a time in the daylight to go. So I used to sleep on a khatia for 6 months
My God.
with my shawl on, and the papers pasted on the
windows.
window pans, because you want some privacy also. So that's how the first 6 months of my surgical residency have been, and every night crying and thinking that this was
it the
I'm here
correct
by
decision?
choice, but was
Yeah.
it a correct decision?
Right.
It was only by the end of 6 months when I realized that 6 months already over is just 2.5 years more.
Uh-huh.
So I survived through. And the most satisfying moment was when I left that institution, and the head of the unit and the head of the department told their 6 male surgical residents who had preceded that she's the best surgical resident we have ever had. And
Wonderful. You would
that
have been
felt,
vindicated.
like worth all the trials and pains that I had gone through in that
Certainly.
phase.
How do people actually justify saying that we don't want a female surgeon?
So there's a basic issue with people understanding that, probably assuming that you're not physically that strong, and it requires a huge amount of the stamina. Sometimes you're there when you work 36 hours. You can understand in the day you're taking your rounds, seeing the patients, doing the dressings, then you're working in the OPDs. At night you're attending to all the surgical patients.
How long do your
Then,
surgeries last?
It depends on what is the procedure. It can be from 1 hours to 2 hours to 4 hours.
Which is
In
the
onco it
longest?
goes in onco it goes sometimes to 10-12 hours if it is
Goodness.
extreme cytoreductions and hypex. So the first notion that they're probably not having that good stamina and physical strength, which is very, very incorrect. Per se, we have to understand that if nature and creator have chosen a woman to give
birth.
life to another soul,
Right.
how much of strength does she possess?
Certainly. Physical and
Absolutely.
mental.
9 months carrying another soul in your womb, nurturing with your own blood and nourishment and everything, and then staying awake for that little soul, somebody else. Right? It's another
course.
soul that you're
Of
bringing up.
course.
How can we even imagine that women don't have that physical strength and stamina?
So it's a clear bias,
When I delivered, right 3 days prior to my, cesarean section, I did 2 back-to-back cancer surgeries. And when I got a little tired, I had to sit on the tool, because that was obviously my 9th month. I had to sit on the tool and complete those surgeries. But I managed it 3 days prior to my surgery.
Goodness.
So this is just a unfair presumption, thinking that they're not fit. And second is that, now you'll get, that is probably a very technical issue, and there is some amount of truth in that. They're saying, if they get married in between, there'll be a bit of chaos, but then they're not responsible for that.
They are not.
They don't
it's
have the
systemic,
support system. They don't have the
absolutely.
support system. You can't tell a resident that we can't take you for this profession because you might get married. She's not going to halt her biological clock just because she has to get into the surgical residency.
And it is
So-
also a social demand to be married to produce children.
Yeah, and if you don't do that,
Yeah.
you're again labeled that
of
they are
course.
preferring their career to that. It's not preferring one over the other. Why are we, expected always the ones to be creating that balance? Why can't we create an environment
A system.
where we support that lady in whatever she's
Absolutely.
doing? The way there are certain places in UK, they have the women in surgical training support groups where you are offered a part-time job if you're lactating, because you don't want to decide between lactating your child continuously
And
for 2
performing
years
the
and between your.
surgery.
If you take your child here to your workplace and you start feeding, you'll be laughed at.
Right.
You don't have any
You don't have
crushes.
sensitive
you don't have
workspaces.
yes, exactly.
You don't have hospitals.
Absolutely. See, there are so many physical issues that a woman goes through, right from her adolescence, then to that monthly cycle of periods, who is
Right.
even understanding the kind of hormonal issues, imbalances, and the pains that she goes through that. But she manages to do everything in that. You're not giving her
Right.
some special leaves for that. Yeah?
Right.
You're not considering that. You never consider at your workplace
Period
that the
leaves
woman
are a reality now. I mean, in
but,
some places.
there is again
Yeah.
a lot of conflict around that if you ask for period leaves, that you might end up even in a lesser roles than before, because then they will say that, oh, now she's going to go on leave on around these days, so please,
Right.
don't hire.
Which makes me feel that, how important it is to understand equity.
Yes.
How important it is to understand what a
Absolutely.
person is going through, what their, constraints and limitations are, and we accept that person along with them.
Yes.
Because it is a society, it is the
Yes.
larger human race that puts those constraints on that person.
Yes.
And maybe the biology sometimes, which a person is not responsible for and shouldn't
For.
be punished for.
Yes.
Isn't it? Right.
Very right. Very
So,
right.
just in the first few minutes of our podcast, I understand that you are a very studious, very hardworking person, but even you have had your moments of self-doubt.
Oh, yes.
Because you went on and you chose surgery, you went away from your homeland to study, to practice, and then you had difficult circumstances to face. And it is, but of course, very natural for any person to ask, is this the right decision?
Yes.
And this is for all the girls out there. There will be moments like that, even when you are very studious, very hardworking, high performing individual, there still will be self doubt and you will feel like, is this the right decision? But stick on to your choices and make thoughtful choices. How about your parents? Did they support you in your choice?
I have been very lucky to have the parents I have, especially because my dad, there's a huge role that it's a patriarchal society, so men shape a lot of things. My women, like any other woman, was very apprehensive sending me out, emotionally attached. I was the first kid. We are three sisters. I was the eldest, so she was very close to me. So in her heart of hearts, she actually wanted me to settle
Stay
down
back.
here and stay back and get my trainings here. But she wanted a good future for me as well. When I decided to go back and go out of Kashmir, that was 20 years back. I had a lot of people thronging my place. My relatives, so-called relatives, my neighbors, so-called well-wishers. You have a lot of people then who all of a sudden start showing concern and telling my parents that, oh, don't ever even think of sending
A
the
girl
unmarried
away.
girl out.
Right.
हाथ से निकल जाएगी. As if your pani or reta हाथ से निकल जाएगी. And it was a huge setback.
there is an ad of some product I saw recently which said हाथ से निकलेगी नहीं तो दूर तक कैसे
कैसे
जाएगी?
जाएगी?
Which you've been lucky
So
enough to
very
have
right. So very
a
right.
supportive father.
So it was a huge dilemma at that point of time. For me, would my parents trust me or would they not? And after all that turmoil and drama happening around, and the only question I asked my dad was that, do you trust your upbringing?
That's a
And
very valid question.
Yeah, so if,
And very
if
smart too. You put
yeah,
him
so I said,
in
do you
spot.
trust your upbringing? He said, of course I do. If you put in those core values, no matter what the outside circumstances are, you stick to those values, and that's very important.
And you have to let your child go.
Yes.
And even if for a moment the child does not stick to those values, they falter.
They will not.
They falter. They learn.
If somebody has to
You cannot
falter, they can
always-
falter under your shelter also.
Exactly. And you cannot always shield your
They'll
children.
be hypocritic.
As
They-
Khalil
you will not
Gibran
show
says, they are not your children. They are from you.
Yes.
Which means you are a source to bring them into the world.
Yes, just a source.
Just a source. But you
that,
cannot,
that
you
exactly
cannot have
applies
an
to us
ownership
also.
over them.
Yes. We don't own our children.
Yeah.
So the only question I asked him, was this, that
Do you trust your upbringing?
And the only question he asked me, do you see the road ahead and the hardships ahead? Are you ready for that? I said yes. So with both the yeses, started the
You
journey.
went on.
Yeah.
And quite a difficult path you have chosen yourself. As they say, the road less traveled. But the road less traveled, I'm sure, has been rewarding for you. I've met some of your patients who are full of praise for you, your ethics, your empathy, and then your procedures. Tell us and tell our audiences, what made you choose this specialization particularly? And how is the scenario in Jammu and Kashmir with regard to these cancers and cancers largely? Because now, as we know, cancers are a global, epidemic.
Yes.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge health issue. And it does not remain confined to health. It becomes an emotional, a wellness, a financial issue. And not just for an individual, but for the whole family.
Absolutely.
And with so many cancer patients around, with so many cases of cancer, every other day you get to hear that, someone or the other either has been detected with cancer or has expired. Yes, or has succumbed to the thing. So it's not a disease. It's a journey. It's I don't know how do you term it. It's a monster of sorts. How do you see it? How do you see your journey and your specialization in this scenario?
So when I decided to go for surgery, one of the reasons was that you see the disease and you're able to control it and take it out in a moment and give immediate relief to that patient. And when I went to Delhi and I luckily got my first JR-ship there when I was preparing for my PG and I got selected in DNB, the first residency I did after that was in an oncosurgery unit, where I realized that what it means. When people lose hope, giving them that hope back.
Right.
So it was in addition to that instantaneous relief that you provide, you're able to see it and you're able to, guide them and then treat them and then take them out of that fear. We call cancer a monster, but cancer is not end of the life. That's what people need to understand. It is just a bend in the life, which we have to help them to navigate well. And trust you me, Mantasha, it cannot be much rewarding thing for you when you're able to see that you have been able to pull people out of the darkest moments of their life.
Yeah.
It is so
I'm sure.
rewarding, emotionally, mentally. So I'm a very emotional person. So my seniors and my heads of the units used to tell me that, in a few years you'll be mad because you're crying over every patient. And there's a dictum in our profession that says you have to stay compassionate and yet emotionally detached,
Yeah, which is
because otherwise
which
you
is like an
lose your
oxymoron.
sanity. You lose your
Yes.
sanity. From morning to evening you're dealing with people who are either in one stage or the other stage of the cancer. They are in the worst phases of their mental, emotional, physical health. They're financially getting drained. Their
Yes.
families and caregivers are going through so much of pain, so much of agony, so much of mental, emotional issues, and then financial issues also. So by the end of the day you go back with so much of burden in your heart
I'm
and
sure.
soul and head, that it's so important to maintain that sanity. So even if you have to cry, you have to go back and cry all alone, cry through the nights. And my family sometimes makes fun of me, ये इकलौती डॉक्टर ऐसी है कि जो आके नमाजें हाजत अपने पेशेंट्स के लिए पढ़ती हैं. But somehow I believe that if Almighty chose me for this profession, this was the purpose of my existence. We are all
Wonderful.
created here for some
For some
purpose. No, we are not
purpose.
born just to eat, drink, procreate, and go.
Yeah.
If you've been created as humans, you have some huge emotional, a purpose to
Serve.
solve and serve.
Yeah.
If you look at the Japanese population, why is it living so long, living so healthy,
Yes.
and such a nice, decent civilization? Because that core value they have not changed. When they bring their kids up, they teach them the concept of living for others,
Right.
living for a purpose. That is what has to be there. Otherwise, each one of us has to die.
Absolutely.
It's not about what we're getting from the society, what we're giving back. And for me as a surgeon, as a cancer surgeon, it was a huge opportunity to sit with my patients, discuss their issues, guide them, and wherever the treatment was upfront possible, to pull them out of that darkest moment.
You are a true healer, I must say.
I don't know what, I try to be a healer. We can cure, we cannot heal, to be very
Yeah.
honest. If you ask me honestly, हम एक जरिया हैं. I have always believed that if something has to happen to a patient, we become a mode
A
of
medium,
that.
yeah.
A medium, a
Yeah.
mode of that. It is all planned where the patient would land, what would happen to that patient. But so that person or that patient is sent to that very particular probably circumstance
That's correct.
to get that,
but
whatever is destined
rationally
for them.
speaking, facilities, infrastructure, services matter. And how do
Yes,
you
a
see with so much rise in cancer patients globally and in Jammu and Kashmir? Where do you see your facilities?
Oh, it is a new age epidemic. It is so horrifying. We're technically sitting on a time bomb with, having 2 crore people being diagnosed with various cancers across the globe every year.
Right.
And 1 crore of them losing their life to it, succumbing to the disease. And then your European agencies or cancer agencies telling you that this is just 1/3 of the number, actual number. So you know what we're dealing with. It's horrifying. And when you see at the statistics, Globocon or WHO statistics, and the extrapolation of what is happening right now, you
be
look at the
horrified.
figures, what is going to happen in 2030, you start getting goosebumps.
तो डॉक्टर शबनम, आप बता रहे थे कैंसर्स के बारे में. अगर हम कैंसर्स इन विमेन के बारे में बात करें तो ग्लोबली एज वी नो सर्वाइकल कैंसर इज़ देयर एंड ब्रेस्ट कैंसर इज़ देयर. ऑल्दो फ्रॉम वॉट एवर लिटिल आई नो, आई हैव कम टू नो कि हमने ब्रेस्ट कैंसर में काफ़ी एडवांसमेंट्स कर ली हैं. तो क्या जो जम्मू कश्मीर का सिनारियो है, इज़ इट एनी सिमिलर और डिफरेंट व्हेन इट कम्स टू कैंसर्स इन विमेन?
Breast cancer is the number 1 cancer in women in reproductive age group and number 1 killer amongst the cancers.
Still?
And yes, it is the number 1 now. It used to be cervical cancer earlier on. It is breast cancer now, and we exactly replicate the data that is global.
Okay.
So the cervical cancer numbers dropped because there was extensive awareness, screening, and vaccinations.
Right.
Which is lagging in many other cancers. So that became number 3, number 4 in places. Breast took the top position. and there are various reasons for that, because it's called a disease of urbanization.
Uh-huh.
Health, the lifestyles have changed, eating
Right.
has changed, weights have gone up, physical activity has gone down, food is adulterated, there's so much of pollution, and a lot of stuff is happening,
Right.
changes in the first childbirth, the breastfeeding, everything put together. Because cancers are multifactorial, you cannot pinpoint one cause,
particular
and we are
factor.
exactly having the same data. So if you look at in our country, we are having so globally you're having 23 lakh women being afflicted by breast cancer every year,
Uh-huh. That's
and out of
huge.
that 50% are losing their life.
Right.
Every 4 minutes one woman loses its life to breast cancers.
Goodness, that's huge.
Currently 60% of our women are coming in advanced stages, which is stage 3, stage 4, and so out of every 2 being diagnosed, roughly 1 is losing her life. So this is the exact scenario that we're facing over here also, and with additional issues. One being that in West it strikes after 50 years, but our risks are increasing only after 40 years.
Okay.
We have a pretty good chunk of young age breast cancer, YABCs, and the other problem is that we are having bad prognostic or bad pathological subtype of the cancers
Right.
more than anywhere else in the country.
Uh-huh.
I'm talking about Kashmir.
Kashmir, huh.
So that's probably because of the genetic pooling also here. A lot
Right.
of consanguineous marriages, gene amplification staying there, and many other factors. Some attributed to oral contraceptives and all, but we don't have an exact link to that. We are very poor in that research as of now. But yes, triple negative breast cancers are becoming a big issue over here.
What are triple negative
So
breast
they are the
cancers?
most aggressive form of the breast cancer,
Uh-huh.
where you don't have any receptor for hormone positivity or targeted therapy by HER2 new receptor, what we call. So you can't target any of that. So you're, it's very aggressive. It's very rapidly dividing, and it can go to the brain also quickly. So this is an issue that we face. here.
Right. We understand that medical science is, organized in a manner or built in a manner to treat,
Yes.
not to possibly prevent so much. But still, if I ask how to prevent cancer in women, what would be the answer?
So preventive medicine in itself is a huge thing, but unfortunately in cancers it has not picked up, especially in our part of the globe. In last 20 years, we have done humongous changes or advancements in how to diagnose and treat and give precision oncology, tailor making, customization of the treatments, targeted therapies, immunotherapies, gene editings, and blah blah blah.
Right.
But we cannot forget the fact that even in this era, 21st century, we are still having a big chunk or 50 to 60% of our women coming in advanced stage, which in itself shows us a mirror and tells us that we have not done much in terms of the preventive oncology.
Right.
If you talk about the screenings, there is a huge controversy going on around the screenings also. It's a resource limited region, and then we don't have the
How
incidences.
expensive are screenings if we go for breast and cervical cancer screenings?
So cervical
or
cancer
other?
screening is very, very less cost. It's a very economical thing. Pap smears and all. And then you have vaccinations also.
I remember when I was studying abroad, it was mandatory on NHS.
Yes.
They would send you a reminder, go for your pap smear.
So the approach to cancers would vary also in the region that you belong. NHS is social security system, wherein the onus of detecting and treating and giving that post-treatment care and biological everything, the onus
Lies
is on the
government
right?
system, yes.
So they try to detect it quite early.
So that the burden doesn't increase on them.
Yes.
Which should be the case here because it's a welfare state and most of the,
we spend from our pockets a lot majority of the time. So instead of, rolling out a screening program, at least we can focus on awareness. We have to create that. In screening programs, how many women would you screen? And then maybe the issues of the, if you are rolling out in the program, the government, then how many women would be screened? How many would we detect? It's not as high as US, maybe we'll say. And then how many we have to screen to get one cancer is all the, controversy. And then screen detected, it's more dangerous, overdiagnosis, overtreatment. But we have to understand that women are emancipated in terms of their health. They do have that breast awareness, and they do the breast self examinations from a very young age, wherein they get comfortable with the feel of their breast, and they know how to diagnose them early also. In addition to, so the screening programs might not give you much benefit in that population, but in a population where you're having women coming, 50-60% of them coming in the later stage, either you roll out a screening program or you give them awareness.
Right.
Either you make them breast aware. You tell the young girls in their teens how to palpate their breast, to be familiar with what is normal in their breast first, to be able to pick up the
and
abnormal.
how to do that? Is that available on YouTube or other resources?
It's not something that you can just do on YouTube. It might be available. The breast self examination YouTubes would be there, but you have to have a structured program. You have to get to the grassroots level. We have to work on healthcare professionals that are the first line of contact with these women,
that's
like
correct.
ASHA workers,
That's in order to reach
and
everybody, to make the access.
you can train them even in clinical breast examination. They go door to door. In Kolkata, they're running such programs. Dr. Diptendra Sarkar is running those programs, and that's my dream over here for my own women.
Because there are already so many, ASHA workers, NHMs.
All you need to do is just give them a small training session, certify them, and teach them how to screen for the commonest cancers.
Until we do that for women to who internet is accessible, which is also a huge number, would you recommend any particular videos or links which should be followed?
There are a huge number of the videos out on there. In fact, my all videos are also there. But what I recommend
particularly
is
about breast examination?
Not about breast examination per se, but awareness about signs and subtle signs and symptoms and what needs to be done. So what I would recommend is that basically whenever we run those awareness programs, to attend those awareness programs, because then we can teach them.
Right.
We have to get connected with the schools wherein we have women more than 13-14 years of age, girls more than 13-14, and they have to be taught breast health.
Right.
How to be aware of what is happening to the breast nodule when it is developing, and how to be acquainted with the normal feel of that breast, so that when they grow up and then they do breast self examinations regularly, they are able to pick up the subtle signs and symptoms.
Even menstrual health 40, and related,
yes, at 40
cancers.
or 50, you cannot tell women start breast self examination and then it's going to help. The data shows it didn't work because they never knew what is the normal feel. They didn't even know it's going to change. The feel is going to change during their cycles. During the ovulation, it's going to be different. Post periods, it's going to be different. Yes. So unless you teach them over years, and that's why lifestyle modifications had to be taught at a very early age. And that was my dream when I came back to this place and I started Pink Kayachathon and Bluethorn. These are
when did you start it?
It was in 22. So Pink Kayachathon is for breast cancer awareness. It's an annual mega event, and Bluethorn is for colorectal cancer awareness. It's again mega event in March, because those 2 months are dedicated to respective organs.
Did you do it this year?
Yes, I did.
And you're going to do it next year as well?
Inshallah, yes. Bluethorn again we'll be doing.
So if women want to join you, what to do?
So I realized that for screenings, the age is entirely different. High risk population. If I have to teach them about lifestyle modifications, I have to connect with higher secondaries and colleges and universities, because you have to teach them what's to be done and what's not to be done for them to get that into their healthy habits, rather than all of a sudden telling them at 40 or 50 this is what you need to change, which is very difficult. Right. So engagement at community levels is very, very important. They have to keep themselves updated about what's happening. The taboo around the cancers has to go down, because there is so much of social taboo around the cancers that women are not ready to accept they have it. They are anyhow in state of denial. They don't want to get screened because they have that fear. What if they're diagnosed? They don't understand what if they have and they don't get diagnosed.
What is the scenario of medical insurance when it comes to cancer? Because it's a huge drain on family, savings and resources.
So across our country, the penetration of the insurances, health insurances, has been around 13 to 14%. And the scenario is even pathetic when it comes to our place, because many times people confuse between life insurance and health insurance. They don't understand the difference. And there are many aspects, religious aspects also come in, and other aspects also come in, but they get confused between life insurance and health insurance. And
do you think it's important?
It is mandatory.
It's mandatory.
In current era, it is mandatory, because we have to understand that the caregivers also suffer a lot. It's not just that cancer patient, because the onus of providing that care also comes on the caregivers.
Yes.
A lot, many times you don't want to tell them.
That's again women who take care of patients and elderly and sick. And how else, if I may ask, how else is cancer gendered? It's not just that, women have breasts and they have a cervix. That's why it impacts them. Other than that, also, there are gender aspects of cancer. Would you talk a little bit about those?
So my domain was breast and colorectal cancers, and I chose it specifically because these are the organs where women are very conservative and they don't want to get exposed to very frequently to the male, counterparts.
doctor, yes.
So then that was the inherent field that I, as a surgeon, I wanted to serve in these two organs where I could be more beneficial to my women folk.
Yeah.
So the other problem that we see is, first, they don't come out to talk about it. Second, there is so much of social taboo that women who are diagnosed with cancers and have a daughter of marriageable age, they don't want to expose this news to anybody. They don't want to share it with anybody, with the fear that the other people would come to know that they're having cancer, and maybe the daughter will also have such problems and she won't get married.
Goodness.
Imagine where we stand as a society.
The level of sacrifice
Yes.
which is expected of a woman.
And the third thing is, breast, obviously 99% of them are going to be women. But howsoever emancipated, liberated, educated, and financially independent we are, you'll always see it is the male in the family who's taking the decisions. Very important decisions, even regarding to where to go for treatment, whom to go to, how much to spend, what treatment to give.
Right.
You're trying to teach these women that 99% of the times we are trying to save your breast. We can do it, breast conservations. And then the male in the family saying, so what is the risk with that? We say, no, there's no risk per se, because when we conserve a breast, we have already seen all the risks involved, and we offer it only when it is offerable to a breast. And we have data saying that it is equally good as mastectomy, so you don't have to remove it. The only glitch is that giving radiation is must. You might have slight chances of saving that radiation if you're not, if you're sacrificing the whole organ. So they say, what does that mean? I say that means coming for 20-25 days to a hospital and getting that radiation every day for, half an hour or so.
Yeah.
And I get a jolt from the blue when men say, so then it's better to remove the organ.
Yeah, as if it's
They
so
don't
easy.
even give that chance for the woman to react to what, you don't understand what news has been broken to this woman. And then this is like a limb for them. You can't just cut a limb just for a wound on the finger.
It must be devastating.
So it is very painful. Then, people leaving from your room, talking about a lot about the mental well-being of their women in the family and all. They leave this, keep the woman sitting outside, and they come back and should we spend on her? Do you think she's gonna make it, or should we? Is it worth doing it?
Yeah.
It gives you such a big setback. Would you say it for your own self if you're diagnosed? The access to healthcare across the globe is so less for women. It is we talk about the modalities being available all around, but where is the access to those modalities? This woman cannot even take decisions of her treatment, cannot decide on her own where to go for treatment, when to go for treatment, whether to take the treatment or not, and what treatment should she say yes to. Because if you decide for her as a male member of the family, then you take the decision and you don't even bother. But if you let her take that decision, something goes wrong, all the points
falls upon her.
So you have taken this decision, so you
now suffer.
Bhugto, right? It's your decision.
Yeah.
It is a huge pain. You can't imagine.
It's a
what we see.
heartbreaking conversation of like 30 minutes. I really salute your courage, because you deal with these cases day in and day out, and you deal with them, their family members, their emotional and their mental burdens, and maybe sometimes financial also, being an empathetic person that you are. I wish you all the very best with your career, and I hope that people like you who understand a disease so deeply and have a nuanced understanding of not just the disease but the the social and the larger economical aspects around it. Because until and unless you understand a thing holistically, you will never be able to deal with it holistically.
Yes,
and dear friends, cancer is definitely a monster. It is on rise. And like Dr. Shabnam advised us, we have to take preventive care. We must consult our doctors and discuss what are the vaccines available, what are the screenings available. And then we may also want to learn how to examine our breasts and how to do breast examination for early detection of breast cancer. Because if it's detected in first stage, the chances of survival are as high as 90%. If I am correct,
100%. Yes,
almost 100%. 100% compared to if it is detected at the last stage, it goes down to 10 to 20%, which is devastating. So I leave you here with all the questions around cancer, all the self-reflection, and all the changes which we women particularly need to make in our lives. We need to take out time for ourselves, have healthy diet, exercise, and
Yes.
avoid sedentary lifestyle.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
something we can't deal with is bad genes. But then I've heard that they get triggered only when they are coupled with bad lifestyle.
Yeah, 80 to 90% of the breast cancers are sporadic. They can happen to any woman without any family history. But if we have family history, that contributes to 10 to 20, 15% of the breast
which
cancers.
is not huge.
So which is like, if you have a strong family history, BRCA positivity, then the one relative that you have double the chance, two relatives you have triple the chance. But otherwise, it can happen to anybody. And our risk is in our region is 1 in 60 in rural areas, 1 in 22 in urban areas, so an average of 1 in 22. We don't know who that 1% out of the 22 women is going to be.
Right.
So in addition to what genes we have inherited,
born with, yes.
more important is our own, the epigenetics and the environment and healthy lifestyle, de-stressing, having adequate sleeps, and trying to breastfeed our kids, and getting the first pregnancies or deliveries around before 30, 35, and not going for hormone replacement therapies unless dire emergencies. And very important thing that I want to tell women is that our physical activity levels in our region are really very less. You'll talk about home chores and all, but standing at one place and cooking even for 3 hours is not going to be that much of a physical activity, because you're doing it under so much of tremendous stress. Take out 30 minutes of your life, release those positive endorphins from your brain, and do something for your own self.
Which may include as simple as walking.
Brisk walk, 25% risk gets reduced. If your weight is less, then 20 to 40% risk of cancers gets reduced. Vitamin D levels, 70% of our women are having low vitamin D level,
Especially
which is
because
so
of
important.
the cold climate we live in.
Yes. So important for breast cancers, colorectal cancers, for your night sleeps, for reducing your anxieties, your sweating, your joint pains, and all that. So basic things.
There is so much to talk about around cancers, and the time is so limited. But we promise you we'll come back to you with Dr. Shabnam again. And in that episode, we'll particularly focus on some things that you can practice at home and some things that will be even more useful to you. So till then, take care of yourselves, walk, take proper rest, and feel better. Thank you.